We will wait until we hear the bells formally to begin, but thanks for everybody tuning in. Those are the bells signaling that it's 3 p.m., the hour of mercy here in the Vatican. I'm Monsignor Roger Landry, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States of America.
And I am Ines San Martin, Vice President of Communications for the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States of America.
And so we're so excited to have you join us for this live stream on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube. What we're going to do, we'll both give a few of the sensations that are happening here in Rome since the historic election of Pope Leo XIV 2 days ago. And then we want to get to your questions. And so we'd be super grateful if you just type in the comments like you do on any of the platforms with which you're joining us, which should be integrated in what we're getting here. And after some brief remarks, we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Before we go, I just want to indicate that we're going to have a couple banners underneath in case you'd like to get to know more about the Pontifical Mission Societies. One is this daily email that we send out called Journey with the Pope. Do you want to describe that at all, Ines?
Yes, of course. Journey with the Pope is a service that we have been providing for several years now, in which we focus on daily sending you to your inbox a short one paragraph, sometimes it's even just one sentence of what the Pope has recently said when it comes to the importance of the missions. Clearly, Pope Leo XIV, the first Pope that we know of, at least in the history of the Church, since Peter the Apostle himself, who was a missionary, becoming the successor of Peter. So obviously, we're going to be hearing a lot on the missions from the Pope, Pope Leo XIV. So please do subscribe. It's just the one email a day with a little quote and the Psalm of Day in case you want to continue joining us in praying for the missions, which obviously is the core of what we do, foster prayer and people to get to know what the missions are.
We have over 100,000 who have subscribed to Journey with the Pope and who get it every day. And insofar as it's never enough to understand a pope from the outside, but would see, for example, in secular journalism or even sometimes in Catholic journalism. The popes have always said that to understand them, you got to get to know them from the inside. And to get to know Pope Leo XIV, the former Cardinal Robert Prevost, you have to know him as a missionary. And so that's one of the things we try to do with Journey with the Pope. We've done it with Pope Francis. We're going to continue it with Pope Leo XIV. And so please, if you haven't already signed up to receive Journey with the Pope, would encourage you to do it. It's totally free, and we hope it will lead to eternal spiritual wealth, the only one that really matters if you listen to Jesus Christ. And so, Ines, let's just start with a brief sense of what Rome is like now in the 2 days since history was made.
I have to say, this has been a celebration. I've been blessed enough to be in Rome since right before the funeral of Pope Francis, and the spirit of the city has completely shifted from one week to the other. We were obviously first 9 days of mourning for our beloved Pope Francis, the man who we recently lost, and a man who encouraged us a lot, reminding us constantly that we as baptized don't have a mission, we are a mission. We truly are called to be missionaries every single day of our lives and inviting others and bringing others to Christ. Obviously, when the conclave first began, there was a bit of expectation. No one really knew how long was it going to take. For me, it was a blessing to be out in the square the very first day of the conclave, that Wednesday when they went in and voted for the first time, stay there for several hours waiting to see if we had white smoke or not. Hundreds of thousands of people, some estimate 50, some estimate literally 100,000 people came out to the square that first day. It was very moving, it was very touching, it was also very spiritual, because everywhere you were looking at, there were people praying the rosary and truly invested, not in this as a sacred election, not in this just as a spectacle, okay, you're a tourist, I'm going to come, but truly as an incredible moment of faith for Catholics around the globe. And obviously, when it happened, when we saw the Fumata Bianca on the 8th at 6:26, I was too busy to actually look at the time, and I never went back to check. It was completely unexpected. We wanted it. We were hoping for it. We were not, I will acknowledge, I was doing live commentary for the BBC. I was not prepared to start saying, we have a pope.
For me, I was on the EWTN set ready to go live at 6:30 p.m. We needed to scramble 4 minutes early to get our IPBs, our little earpieces in, to get in the seat, to get, when you've got a forehead as prominent as mine, a little bit of the makeup so that people aren't blinded as if it were the transfiguration happening. So we scrambled there and then waited 46 minutes for Cardinal Dominique Mamberti, the proto-deacon, to come on out and give us those words for which the world was waiting. Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, I announced you good news of great joy. Habemus papam, we have a pope. And then he gets into the whole formula about his name. Reverendissimum ac eminentissimum dominum, he repeats a second time. And then he gave us his first name, Robertum. And there are 4 Roberts among the 133 electors. The Archbishop of Washington, Robert McElroy, the former head of the now Dicastery for Divine Worship here, Cardinal Robert Sarra, Cardinal Roberto Repole from Turin, and none of those were really being seriously mentioned. And then there was the Chicago native from the South Side, Robert Francis Prevost, the former head of the Augustinian Order, the former Bishop of Chiclayo. 2.5 years ago, he was there in a missionary diocese in Peru. And then Pope Francis brought him here to Rome to make him the head of the Dicastery for Bishops. And 2.5 years later, he would be the successor of Pope Francis. And so here in Rome right now, everybody's adjusting not just to the reality of a new pope. There's always an adjustment to be made because you're so used to the old pope. Every priest, when he celebrates Mass, is still prone to use the name Francis rather than Leo. But everybody's getting used to that. But everybody's still trying to get their head around the fact that we've got an American Peruvian who is now the Holy Father and what that means. We've got another religious and what that means. A missionary and what that means. Somebody who speaks 6 languages and what that might mean. Somebody who's been here choosing the bishops and what that might mean, and so many other things that can be parsed. So those are the initial things here from Rome. And so we want to get straight to the questions that you're firing away at us, and we're grateful for all of them so that we can tackle as many of those as you give us. So we've already described the actual moment when can you describe the actual moment when Cardinal Prevost appeared on the balcony as Leo XIV? What was your thought?
It was incredible to see him come out in full papal regalia, literally reminding me to what Pope Benedict XVI, but also John Paul II looked like when they came out from that exact same balcony, probably using the exact same red curtains, knowing how those things go. And also to hear him in many ways speak like Pope Francis. It was a beautiful moment of really for the entire church. He was truly telling us, I'm the Pontifex, I'm the bridge builder. It was a beautiful moment.
To see somebody you've seen before now come out not dressed as he was before, but dressed as the new Holy Father, there's always some adjustment there. And so my first impression was, boy, he looks papal. In fact, to me, he looks a lot like Pope Pius XI, who was Pope from 1924 to 1939. I just couldn't believe how much he looked like so many of the paintings of old Pope Leo XI. That was really my first impression. So happy to hear him say those words of the risen Christ, peace be with you, and then to give a beautiful and prepared message to the people of the world. Part of that message, which was music to my ears, was to call us all to be missionaries. He called the people of Rome, the people of Italy, and the people of the entire world to launch out into deep waters with him because, as he would say the next day in his first Mass yesterday, the world is hungering, it's thirsting for the real Jesus Christ. And so he wants to lead the entire church in responding to that great thirst and hunger. So we're going to get to the second question you've sent. We're getting lots of comments in the media asking about the significance of choosing the name Leo. Could you explain what this name choice might mean? I'll take that one. Leo means lion in Latin. And so it does mean a certain strength is already being channeled. Second, he said earlier today when he met with cardinals that he chose the name Leo XIV not primarily out of homage to Leo the Great, one of the tremendous popes who's ever lived. He reigned from 440 to 461, steered down Attila the Hun, gave us some incredible writings about the incarnation of the Lord. etc. But he took it after Leo the 13th, Pope from 1878 to 1903, who's really the father of Catholic social teaching. So moral theology in the church was always kind of individual. How am I going to love my neighbor as Christ has loved me? But we started to have social questions in the 19th century that led the church to start to say, how do groups behave? And what's the morality, for example, of labor unions? What's the morality of businesses that operate in this way? What's the morality of capitalism eventually? How do we understand the family? How do we understand the political arena in a country? How do we understand the international community? How do we protect the environment? All of these are teachings in Catholic social teaching. And so he said he was particularly concerned about the new revolution that was taking place, especially thanks to AI and the entire digital revolution. And he wanted to do for the church in the world today what Pope Leo the 13th did at the dawn of the industrial age, and bring the treasure of the church's understanding to the new questions that are arising that everybody's asking, Catholics and non-Catholics, about how to do what we're doing ethically. And so that was the reason why he said he chose the name. We're going to get to the third question. How long does the transition process typically take? And what happens next for our new Holy Father?
Okay, the length of the transition, it's unclear. We did hear yesterday from our Holy Father that his plan is to keep every head of a Vatican office on their post for a little while. He wants to get settled before he makes any personal decision. In terms of when are we going to be seeing the Pope next? Well, tomorrow, Sunday, he's going to be saying the Regina Coeli prayer, of course, as we all pray every single day at noon during the 50 days following Easter. Is going to be doing that from the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. This is in itself a little bit of a rarity because it usually only happens when there is a big feast, for instance, Easter or Christmas themselves. Usually that noon prayer on Sunday comes from the top floor of the Apostolic Palace. We're not, they're expecting so many people that they're keeping the central balcony at least for this weekend. Following that, we're going to be seeing our Holy Father as ourselves, especially as journalists. Here we're going to have a meeting with him at 10 in the morning on Monday in the Paul VI Hall, which is where the audiences happen during the worst period of winter and summer. And then on Sunday, the 18th, we're going to have the installation mass. This is obviously a very important moment. The Pope is already Pope. There is no such thing as, okay, now you become a Pope because you said your first mass in St. Peter's Square. But it is a very important moment because it's a moment in which he's going to be acknowledged as the successor of Peter, and in many ways also as a head of state during that first mass. We saw for Pope Francis installation mass 31.
It's called inauguration mass. Installation for bishops, inauguration for the papacy.
Thank you for not letting me to just continue saying installation endlessly. But okay, so we saw for Pope Francis inauguration mass 31 head of states came, in addition to 11 royal houses from all over the world. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens now that, again, we have an American Pope, a Peruvian Pope, and also as one of the cardinals who elected him told me yesterday, he's also a Pope from the world because you can easily track him down to Spain because he's married from Spain, and to France because his father came from France.
So just want to highlight one thing on the question, how long does the transition take? It takes the length that it requires for the one who has been selected to say the word accepto. As soon as he says, I accept the name, even before he gives what his name is in the Sistine Chapel, he becomes the successor of St. Peter. So it's a rapid fire transition. Many practical things, of course, have got to be worked out, which is behind the question. But he becomes Pope as soon as he says that one word. It's a truly performative word. He says yes to this enormous responsibility for which we're praying for him. How do you see Pope Leo XIV impacting your missionary work worldwide? I think he's going to have a massive impact. St. John Paul II, for example, called himself a missionary pope of evangelization, traveled to 104 different countries. He gave a missionary impulse to the church. Pope Benedict has continued to travel. Pope Francis traveled quite a bit despite his age and gave us incredibly beautiful words about how each of us is a missionary. That's why God has created us. And he wanted us to grow to full maturity, recognizing that it's not enough for us to follow Jesus privately. Jesus calls us as his disciples, and then sends us out as his apostles to fish for men and women together with the successors of the apostles. And so that's what came before Pope Leo. But as Inez mentioned a little bit earlier, Pope Leo is the first that we know of who has ever served in the missions, leaving his home and going to a faraway place in order to share the gospel, who's been elected successor of St. Peter. And so he brings that enormous experience of 22 years as a missionary in Peru, as well as 12 years, more or less, as a missionary prior general in the Augustinian order, visiting their missions all over the globe 6 months a year. He brings 34 years of experience on the road sharing the faith with them to sit in the chair of Peter. And so that's going to have an enormous impact on the whole church's mission. You know, it was once said when St. Pius X was elected in 1903 that he was the first pastor in centuries who had been elected the successor of St. Peter. And so immediately what he started to do is the first parish priest is what I mean. The first one who had been a pastor of a parish. Every priest is supposed to have a pastoral sensitivity and you name it. But he had served in parishes, so he fixed the church's liturgy right off the bat. He saw how so many young people had an incredible hunger to receive Jesus in Holy Communion. So he lowered the first communion age from about 18 on average to the age of reason, about 8 years old. He did lots of things based on that experience. Well, we've got the first missionary, and he's going to bring that experience to the papacy. We hope his impact on Americans in particular, taking our mission seriously, is going to be enormous. That his messages, like he did in his first homily from the Sistine Chapel yesterday, is going to survey the world and recognize that the greatest need is the gospel. The greatest need is Jesus himself. And then have us all collaborate with him in this worldwide fishing crew Jesus put together, launching out into the deep water from the bark of Peter. Let's see what our next question is. For those of us who want to support the church's mission during this transition, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, prayer. Prayer is free and it's never enough. We have never said enough prayers. Secondly, please do subscribe to Journey with the Pope. It's going to be a great way for you to accompany our Holy Father in his own missionary endeavors. Third, get to know our Pope from his own mouth, his own words. As a recovering journalist myself, I cannot stress enough just how important it is for you to always go to the source. If we send you a Journey with the Pope and a beautiful quote, and you think this is great, I want to know more, I want to read more, please continue doing so. He's your Pope too. He's everyone's Pope, and we're all called to learn and know and enrich ourselves with what he's saying. Third, and to me personally, very, very important is you can continue to know more about the Pope, but more extensively about the church and the missions that he's so loved by subscribing to Mission Magazine. This is a beautiful publication that was actually launched by Archbishop Fulton Sheen back in the 1950s. And it's a publication that we curate with a lot of love to ensure that you truly get quarterly stories from all over the missions. The impact of your generosity, the impact of your prayers, the impact of everyone who loves the Catholic Church in mission territories is truly captured. I would like to say, as the editor, it's easy for me to say that I succeed in that quarterly publication. It's what we ask for is a $2 kind of contribution,
which is the cost of the magazine. We're
yeah.
asking just so that we're not losing money on it, so that we can continue to send money to the 1,124 missions throughout the world. So $2 a hit on that, in which it's pretty much the cost, but you're not going to get a richer one source place about the church's mission work across the world than Mission Magazine.
Great.
We'll get to the next. Do the cardinals go into the conclave already having an idea of their name as Pope, of their papal crest and opening statements? Yes and no is the best way to say it. The popes who have spoken about it have said that sometimes when people are mentioning him as a candidate, they begin to think about what name they'd choose. Pope Francis said when he was in the conclave in 2005 that as he was starting to get some votes, the conclave that elected Pope Benedict, he started thinking about a name, and he said, I'd take John the 24th. 8 years later, when he was elected, he took the name Francis in order to foster the whole church's love for the poor. Pope Benedict never said when he began to think about his name. John Paul II obviously didn't think about it until after John Paul I was elected, only a little bit more than a month prior. And so some might think about it if they think that there's a possibility they'd be elected. For most others, it would be a distraction that would take their eyes off of Christ and might make them a little proud or self-centered. And so a lot don't think of that. Papal crest, as we saw today, just a couple hours ago, we've got the new papal crest of Pope Leo XIV. And what was done there is he took his episcopal crest, and his episcopal motto is the Bishop of Chiclayo, and they just put it on the whole background of any successor of St. Peter. Here, those in the Vatican who are expert in these things fix it up a little bit so it's even more beautiful. But in that shield, he took an image of Our Lady, the Fleur de Lis, very dear to us who are French Canadians in origin. Likewise to those like our Director of Development, Josephine Everly, who comes from New Orleans. But the Fleur de Lis symbolic of Our Lady, and then the symbol of the Augustinians, which is a heart on fire, like St. Augustine, pierced by a sword, open for everybody on top of a book, because St. Augustine and the Augustinians are great learners and great teachers. And so if a bishop is made the Holy Father, he's almost always going to start with what he brought to the papacy as prior to arriving. And then in terms of opening statements, few would have an opening statement. You would have to be somewhat confident that you were going to be elected. The fact that Pope Leo XIV clearly was ready not only to come out on the balcony with a prepared statement, as well as his awesome homily yesterday, might be a sign that he thought before lunch yesterday or 2 days ago that he might get elected, because it looks like he had some thought in it. Otherwise, he's able to type very fast in a print ready way. And so, but that would, I think, be the exception rather than the rule. Let's get to the next question. Could you explain the tradition of the black and the white smoke to me? What's the difference between the black and the white smoke, and when did that start? And
now, so the first time that I know of the chimney being used in the Sistine Chapel was actually when the first conclave happened in the Sistine Chapel in the mid 1600s. The black smoke obviously signals there is no pope. The white smoke obviously signals there is a pope. And chemicals are put into the chimney, the furnace actually that is inside the Sistine Chapel, to guarantee that the smoke comes out in the way it does. Now I have to say, I was kind of I'm prepared for that question, so I don't really know.
So a little bit what I know in the early days, like, so they had the first election in the Sistine Chapel soon after it was built in the early 1500s. And then most of the elections were taking place across the city of Rome in what's called the Quirinale Palace. That was most of the papal elections in the 1800s, for example. And then they came back here in 1878, the election that led to Pope Leo XIII, after whom Leo XIV takes his name. And it was the election in 1914 in which they first started giving the signals outside through smoke. Prior to that, they'd do the signals with the bells. And you'd know that a pope was elected when you started to hear the peal of the bells of St. Peter, and that's when everybody would come. But we've become used to this whole tradition with the smoke signal. And so there's a chimney watch that takes place, everybody draws, and you're looking between the difference between black and white. They've just started to put the chemicals these last two elections, because in 2005, much of the smoke was coming out gray, and people didn't know whether there was a new pope or not. A lot of fake news was going out that a pope had been elected when it was supposed to be black. So they're now using some chemicals to assist in the color detection. But we only had black smoke twice. We had it on the first night after the first ballot, and then we had it after the next two ballots on Thursday morning. And then we were expecting to have either black or white smoke at the end of two ballots on Thursday afternoon. But after the first ballot, so the fourth ballot, they had elected Pope Leo. And so we got white smoke, and all of us, as we talked about earlier, had to scramble. That answered the next question already. Many of us are wondering, what do we know about Pope Leo XIV's background that might shape his papacy? Take that in this.
Well, we know many, many things, but the priority is something that Monsignor has already spoken about. This is the first man who makes it to the throne of Peter since the Apostle Peter himself. We're talking about a man who was a missionary virtually all of his ministry. He had very, very few years as a Catholic priest in the United States themselves. He spent most over 20 years in Peru, and then he spent 12 years, technically speaking, living in Rome as the head of the Augustinian. But for what we've heard, he would spend close to 6 months a year actually on the road, visiting the over 70 countries where the Augustinians have a presence today, because they are primarily a missionary order. So it's fascinating to see that, and that's definitely going to be shaping his pontificate. The priority of not just Pope Francis urging all of us to remember that we have a baptismal call to be missionaries and that we are missionaries by baptism, but truly be a man who's going to go out, I believe, and continue working the church from a missionary perspective as a missionary himself. Something that I will like to eventually ask our Holy Father is just how difficult the transition is going to be, because this is a man who was used to getting on a horse and just going to a parish, and again getting on a plane, and one day waking up in Uganda and the next day waking up in Madagascar, and suddenly he's pretty much going to be logged within the Vatican walls. And I do think that for someone who used to play tennis every Tuesday at the Agostinianum, right here over there in the center of downtown Rome, it's not going to be, I believe, an easy transition. A lot of sacrifice going on to the added sacrifice itself of actually saying yes to become the successor of Peter.
So next question, any idea where Pope Leo has decided to reside? There were some rumors last night that it moved back into the Apostolic Palace, but there's been no official word about where he will reside. I anticipate that he was consulting with the cardinals with whom he was meeting this morning, because many of the cardinals during the general congregations prior to the conclave were bringing up certain of the practicalities of the running of the papacy under Francis, and several of them spoke up urging whoever the next pope would be to move back to the Apostolic Palace. When we hear that word palace, we think of Versailles or we think of the White House. It's not all that big A, it's not all that palatial B. And like, so many of them were urging the next Holy Father to just take television crews into the place and show them around, so that people would recognize that if the Pope were to move back into the Apostolic Palace, he's not going from a small little guest house to some type of massive residence, but going to a place where the security is going to be much easier for him to be protected, where it's going to be much easier for him to do his work. Pope Francis wanted to be surrounded by as many people as possible. St. John Paul II, for example, was always surrounded by people because he was inviting people for lunch, dinner, and breakfast pretty much every day. And so we got information that way. We'll see what Pope Leo XIV wants to do. But as of right now, there's been no notice as to where he's going to stay.
Now, what I have heard as a journalist is that since the Apostolic Palace, the apartment for the Pope in the Apostolic Palace hasn't been regularly used in the past 12 years, if he does decide to move to the Apostolic Palace, there's going to be a bit of a delay to make sure that everything is up and running. One of, for instance, the many questions I personally have is, will they actually install good running water and not just a 5-minute shower that some popes have had to have, because precisely the running water is scarce in the Apostolic Palace. Selfishly, if I might say, as a faithful, I was blessed to come here a lot during Pope Benedict's 16th papacy, and I always loved walking down St. Peter's Square, looking up and seeing that the lights in the papal apartments were on, which of course meant, hey, right here, right there is Pope Benedict, who is still working hard at work, perhaps working on his next book or his next encyclical, and that gave me hope.
I had the chance to be inside the Apostolic the apartment many times because I had the chance to attend the masses of St. John Paul II, and the sort of living quarter areas are nice enough, but they're not great. There's the big library from which the Pope appears with beautiful floors and beautiful shelves and beautiful books. That's really more ceremonial than a place that the Pope uses. And the chapel was underwhelming as a chapel of the successor of St. Peter. Beautiful for a tiny little private chapel, no question about it. But
Just it's
when we eventually take cameras in there, I think people will be able to see that if the Pope moves back in there, he's not living in the lap of luxury. He is going to get a decent night's rest. He is going to be safe there and protected, have some place for his private secretary if he has one. We've got to figure out if he's going to have one, etc. But that's waiting to be determined. What might the likelihood be of Pope Leo XIV visiting the Americas and specifically the USA? I think the likelihood is going to be high there. I would be surprised if it's going to be his number one place, for the same reason why he didn't speak English the first time he came on out, that he doesn't want to portray himself fundamentally as a homer thinking about the issues in the US, but that the first American Pope would come for a long visit to his native country to strengthen us in the faith and solicit our help for him in the middle of the world. It would be hard to believe that he wouldn't come to the US, but I'd be surprised if it were the first. For him to go to South America or Central America, super high again, because 44% of the Catholics in the world are in Central and Latin America. And so any pope would want to go there. Somebody who's so comfortable speaking as a Latin American and culturally living as a Latin American as he did through his 22 years there, I think is going to want to go home. I would wonder if he might go to Argentina, her country first, because Argentina has been waiting for a papal visit from the time Pope Francis was elected, but he never had the chance to be able to go. So we'll all wait to see what his first trip is. He'll be saying a lot by what that first trip is.
Yeah, and I do hope he does go. If it's not the first trip, he does go soon to Argentina. It would be healing for many, many Argentinians who were truly disappointed at the fact that Pope Francis was never able to make it back home, despite trying several times, including, for instance, in 2017, when he went to Peru instead.
So this year is a Jubilee year. Last point on that. So normally popes stay put during the Jubilee year because the whole world comes here to Rome. And I think it'd probably want to welcome you here to Rome too, if you could make it happen during this Jubilee year. We're going to be having a pilgrimage from the Pontifical Mission Societies from October 2nd to 9th. I spent almost 6 years of my life here as a tour guide for the Vatican, as doing 120-part Vatican radio series in the Basilicas of Rome. I'd love you to come with me if you've got the guts. Okay, let's turn to the next question. How was Leo XIV attracted to the Augustinian order, being from the Archdiocese of Chicago? Were there Augustinians assigned to his parish? Answer is yes, there were. When he was first trying to discern a priestly vocation, he thought about the diocesan clergy and then he thought about religious life. But because he was exposed to the Augustinians in his parish and because his mother, Millie, was regularly inviting all types of priests over to meet her sons there in their home in Dalton, Illinois, just south of Chicago proper, he got to know various Augustinians. I'm still waiting to hear the details of his vocation story. I think we're all going to be edified by it. But he was familiar with the Augustinians, and then he entered the Augustinian Minor Seminary, or high school seminary, for which he went to Holland, Michigan, and then he continued along the Augustinian path at Villanova University, run by the Augustinians outside of Philadelphia. And then he was sent over here to Rome, where he got advanced degrees studying with the Dominicans at the Angelicum. What do you think of the fact that he's the first American Pope, and what impact might that have on the international stage?
I think it's very, very important. It's very, very telling. But I do want to highlight the fact that he's a man who, having been born in Chicago, decided to become a Peruvian citizen. He's a naturalized Peruvian citizen. And also, as I mentioned before, his mother comes from Spain, his father comes from France. So I do think we're going to see a Pope from the United States capable of engaging world leaders such as the President of the United States or many other leaders as a one-on-one, I'm American, you're not going to bully me, but also as a man who is a Pope coming from the world, is going to be someone who's going to be engaging the church and mission territories, not as the 800-pound gorilla that sometimes Americans can be perceived as, but truly as a missionary themselves who's talking to them in their own languages. He speaks 6 languages: English, Spanish, French, Italian, and
Portuguese.
And I think it's German, but please don't quote me on that. So again, everywhere he goes, he's going to be talking to them to people in their own mother language, and that's going to be fascinating.
It will bring us back, at least in that respect, to the pontificate of John Paul II with his 12 languages. Looking ahead, what gives you the most hope about this new chapter in our church's history? Jesus Christ said in the book of Revelation, "Behold, I am making all things new." And he always makes things new, wanting to make all things new, which there are two ways that we understand newness. We understand it in brand new, and then we understand it in refreshing or new and improved, we might call it. When Jesus says, "I want to make all things new," he doesn't want us discarding the old and getting something brand new, but he wants to refresh everything from the inside. He wants to give it new life. And so the election of a new Holy Father is not just something new happening in this 1 out of 8 billion people's lives on earth, in this case, Robert Francis Prevost of Chicago, but it's meant to lead us all to a rebirth of our own faith. Just as much as he has received a vocation, so you and I have received a vocation. We've got a vocation like him, first and foremost, to be a saint, to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, to share the good news with others who we know. We're not going to have the same pulpit he does on that loggia behind me, but there are going to be certain people that you and I alone are going to be able to reach because we're the only real Christian they might know in their life. We're the most credible Christian they might have in their life. And so it's meant to lead to this rebirth. So what gives most hope about this new chapter in this church's history is this opportunity for all of us to hear the gospel anew, to commit ourselves to living it and sharing it anew, and that we're going to have someone with particularly American skills revitalizing the most important institution on the earth, the papacy, because he is the vicar of Christ on earth, the savior of the world, the incarnate one who is still with us. And our help of him is going to be enormous, and he's counting on our help. With that in mind, last question that's been submitted. What prayers or intentions would you suggest our viewers offer for Pope Leo XIV as he begins his papacy? We talked in general about the need for prayer, but what would you suggest people do? And then I'll have a couple suggestions.
I would suggest to, first of all, the Rosary. We know he obviously considers himself as a beloved son of Mary. We see it in his papal crest. We see it in the way that he chose to lead everyone in the square in praying a Hail Mary and not an Our Father on the day he came in the balcony. And the second prayer I would suggest is actually the prayer of Saint Michael the Archangel, who that was, of course, penned by Pius XIII.
Pope Leo XIII.
Sorry, yes.
So the one after whom he took his name, to strengthen us during a time in which there were many transitions. Those are really good suggestions. I think the prayer that's most important to pray is Jesus' own prayer from the Last Supper and the cross, which saved us, that he, our new Holy Father, celebrates every day. That's the prayer that brings us most into communion with him. And so I'd encourage anybody who could get to daily Mass, there's no more important way to pray for the Holy Father. We just started yesterday filling that massive hole in the Eucharistic prayer where for 17 days we were not able to mention the name of a pope. And here in Rome, because the Pope is also the Bishop of Rome, we could mention no one in that Eucharistic prayer. I can't tell you how beautiful it was yesterday to hear that name prayed. I can celebrate Mass before I broadcast the Mass. But today I celebrated a Mass just by myself because I wanted, in my own advanced placement New England phonetics, to be able to say the name Leo in praying the Mass in a private chapel at the North American College. And so that's, I think, the greatest way we can pray for him. If you can't get to Mass, there is a votive Mass in the Roman Missal that we pray for the Holy Father. Any of the prayers that are used by the church there are beautiful prayers for the Pope. And the most famous prayer of all is something that they sing here in the Vatican. When they first praise Christ who reigns always, he's the one that the Pope works for. Then there's this prayer in Latin, which I'll say in Latin, and we can offer it for Pope Leo together, and then I'll translate it for you. Oremus pro pontifice nostro Leone. Let us pray together for our new Holy Father, Pope Leo. Dominus conservat eum, et vivivit eum, et beatum facit eum in terra, and non tradat eum in animas inimicorum eius. May the Lord protect him, bring him to life, defend him, and free him from all his enemies. And when we say enemies, we're not really talking about enemies in this world. For example, Freemasons and other things who have systemically, over the course of centuries, had a vituperative hatred for the papacy. Secularists who might hate, militant secularists who might hate all those who have some type of faith. But in a particular way, all those who are principalities and powers, the devil against whom we pray the prayer of St. Michael, who are trying to frustrate his papacy, trying to destroy it, because if they're able to do that, then they're going to be able to hurt many people. And so that beautiful prayer, Dominus, conservat eam et vivificet eam et beatum, make them blessed on earth, beatum facit eam in terra, and liberat eum ab omnibus inimicis eius, from all his enemies. So we can pray that together for him. And maybe we can finish with a prayer in which we take his lead from his first Orbi et Orbi and turn to the mother God the Father chose for his son, and that son gave us on Calvary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Mother of the Church, pray for him. Saint Peter the Apostle, pray for him. Saint Joseph, protector and patron of the Church, pray for him. So once more, thanks for following us in this conversation that we had today. One more encouragement, if you're not already subscribing to the free Journey with the Pope every day, we're going to try to keep you informed of what he is saying and doing, particularly as it impacts the Church's mission across the globe. And if you can spare it, for $2 a copy 4 times a year, subscribe to Mission Magazine, so that we're able to bring you in a much deeper sense, not only what he is doing, but what all the missionaries all across the world are doing. Sometimes we need to be inspired in our faith, and there's nothing more inspiring than those who give up their whole life, like the now Pope Leo XIV did, to travel to a faraway country to share the greatest gift of all time, the gift of Jesus Christ himself. So if you'd like to be inspired any of the 365 days of the year, that's the link to click. Last word, Inez.
Simply, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. And as someone asked, is this a hopeful time for you guys? To me, this is extremely hopeful time. It is beautiful. It's the first time I'm in Rome for a conclave. It's the first time I'm here, truly living the beautiful experience of the universal church in the streets of Rome. It was a beautiful, hopeful moment, and let's continue to pray for our Holy Father, that he continues to be a bridge builder, a pontifex for all of us in the universal church.
God bless you all.